I sort of want to digest and reflect on all that's happened here so far. Starting off with, I think Cisco, CNBC, so I watch the markets, closed up about 3% today, all-time highs. Software didn't have such a good day. I remember a time not so long ago when Cisco needed to talk about software, like that's what the company was doing, but you're doing a lot. Chuck, what is the perspective that we need to have on the both disruptive possibility and the destructive potential of AI and how to thrive with all that going on?
Well, first of all, thanks everybody for being here today. We appreciate you spending time with us, and hopefully you'll enjoy a break before we have our discussion with Jensen to wrap things up a little bit later. Look, I think that having lived through the dot-com era, and I'm assuming some people in here have, although I found myself the other day talking about a mainframe and half the room was looking at me like I was crazy. I think that, look, I think the bottom line is you can either watch this thing, you can embrace this thing, or you can get run over by it. And I don't think that watching is an option. And I think what we heard from everybody today, all those great speakers that Jeetu, you did a great job putting the lineup together. John, we did an interview with John this morning to start, and he said, he looked at Jeetu and said, Jeetu, you assisted Chuck in putting this thing together, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, I actually assisted Jeetu in putting this thing together. But I just think it's important. I think I don't think you have a choice but to embrace it. And I think those, we've heard a lot of people say that people, you don't have to worry about AI taking your job. You have to worry about someone who uses AI more effectively than you taking your job. And I think that's true of companies. I think it's true of countries. I think it's true everywhere. I think that if you don't embrace it, figure out how to utilize it, how to use it effectively. I talk to my CEO peers, and the fear of being disrupted by your competition that figures something out before you do is real.
Yeah. Jeetu, Chuck said it, so build on it here. This is the second year that Cisco has convened this AI Summit, and something tells me you did this because you're learning something from it. And however you have used this over the past year that led you to want to do another one would probably inform folks in the room how to think about what we're about to hear from Jensen, and then beyond that, how to really use what's been learned here today in preparing for 27. How did you use it?
Look, the reason we do this is because on a day-to-day basis, all of us are so focused on the tactics of the business, and we're all kind of in operational roles, and we're kind of, and it's a very important thing that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. But sometimes it helps to just take a day, broaden the aperture, and see what's happening. And that was the intent of today, and that's the intent of it with the dialogue that each one of you will have with each other during dinner, and then hopefully what Jensen, who's a very big thinker, will come in and talk to Chuck about in the evening as well. But I feel like there's a few things that at least we should start thinking about on how this really helps our organization. So for example, just a few top-of-mind things that actually were really interesting that came out of it. The population demographic change actually makes AI really seductive and important rather than not. And as the younger population is going down in the world, AI could actually help the aging population in a better quality of life. That was something that I'm not sure if it was part of everyone's calculus. The other thing that's actually been really interesting is last year it almost felt like fantasy to say, these coding tools are going to do it as quickly as they are. And now, by the way, what you're starting to see is the term 100% is being thrown out, not just by one or two people, but many, many people are starting to throw it out. That 100% of the code might be written by AI. And so I think you will see a shift in the way the technology is getting built. And then the other thing is it's not just about language models. I think physical AI is at the precipice. I think the way in which we build out these models are going to be really interesting. The way that the business models shift, the pricing changes, the economics of the entire industry are going to shift is going to be pretty meaningful that we have to all get prepared for. And whether or not we're consumers of the technology, we're builders of the technology, we're sellers of the technology, we're partners with other people, I think it's an ecosystem effort. And the reason we think that these conversations are important is because we can't have technology companies just go in a walled garden by themselves and think that they're doing great work when the absorption rate of this technology is actually not that good.
Yeah.
And so that's a really important dimension.
You know, I can't get past the idea, and Chuck, as I've heard you guys talk about how this came together, this isn't an event that gets better by your prompt engineering. You and Jeetu aren't sitting in a room going, okay, well, what should we talk? It's people, right? Which people do we need to get in the room to give the best insights? And then we're talking about when people leave this room, getting together over dinner and making the right connections, and then coming back in and listening to people. We're talking about AI is great at coding right now, but one of the limiting factors is, are the people ready to embrace it in the right way to make it effective, or the team's gonna be too weak, not have enough trust, and end up getting overrun? Chuck, how do you prepare and manage people in this environment when they become the X factor in whether the code, the AI, actually becomes effective?
Well, I think if you heard what Fran said earlier, you have to create an environment where you tell people, if you embrace it and use it, it's going to be good for you. Even if you embrace it in a way that eliminates 50% of what you would normally do in your job, if someone's willing to do that, we're not going to get rid of them. We're going to keep them. I mean, because they're that forward thinking. And I think that I just think it's, look, the people side of this whole thing, there's such an over-rotation on, you know, the automation and the job elimination, and it's going to make us all robots, and we're going to sit. I heard a couple times, we're going to stare at the ocean, write poetry, whatever we're going to do. The reality is that the people interaction and the ability to lead people and the interactions and the proximity that you have to be to your teams and how they have to feel about you as leaders is probably going to accelerate over the next few years. And the expectation of leadership is going to be higher because of the uncertainty and all the rhetoric in the marketplace. If you think back to COVID, when we had so much uncertainty with what was happening in the world, we didn't know what was going on. People thought, you know, the world, we just don't know. Leadership and culture was so important during that time. And now we're entering into a wave where people are really uncertain. They don't know. So leadership and culture and communication, frequency of communication, transparency of communication, and honesty is going to be more important than ever, and that's the human side. So it's a combination of these, the technology, the AI, and then the human EQ and leadership that are really going to define the winners, in my opinion.
Jeetu, in your conversation earlier with Dylan from Figma, you talked about the importance of designing better software. And something I've been thinking about lately is 25 years ago, when I was first entering the workforce in a significant
10?
way. I was working at the San Jose Mercury
10,
News.
we're just going to go with that.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh boy, my kids are getting ready to go to college now. It's wild.
Call me when you're a grandfather.
Hopefully it'll be a while.
Hopefully.
My kids are getting ready to go to college. We had this moment when coding for the web, HTML markup, became commoditized with WYSIWYG, you know, Dreamweaver, and then eventually all this other stuff. And that was a moment where it's not that the web wasn't interesting anymore. It's that making content on that platform, doing that software thing, was about to get way more complicated than that tool was going to be able to do. And I wonder if we're approaching that in the broader world of enterprise software, where sure, it looks like these code assists are doing a great job now, but it just means that our old way of making the old kind of software is about to be so obsolete that it's going to take people and creativity a whole different level of thought to create what's really going to be amazing 5 years from now.
See, I actually think where you direct your caloric expenditure will change. And so when technologies are just starting to mature, you're spending your caloric expenditure much more so on the lower areas of the stack and the optimization. And then over time, what ends up happening, and you've seen this throughout history, is those things get more and more abstracted and get simpler and simpler to use. And as they get simpler to use, it's not that people kind of don't have anything to do. They can then redirect their efforts and kind of focus on things that are higher order bits. And I actually feel like there is so much higher order bit that we need to make sure that we actually do that. Infrastructure, for example, is far too complicated. We would like to make sure that infrastructure becomes plug and play. And if you could do that, that is now less caloric expenditure on infrastructure, and then there's more that can actually start happening towards getting real solutions built out that are actually going to have real ROI for the market. So in my mind, there's this, Fei Li said it best, which is this kind of polarized narrative that happens, which is like, oh my goodness, this is either doomsday or it's going to be the most, or everyone, or this thing's not going to work at all. I think
it can be both.
It can be both, but it's actually not productive as a dialogue for society, because what's a productive dialogue is what are we going to do to make sure that the shift is occurring of where the caloric expenditure is going to be directed towards. And if you can actually have that caloric expenditure directed towards the things that are going to have the highest value to society because other things got automated, that's actually good for society, it's good for human lives, it's good for companies, it's good for individuals, it's good for quality of life, all of those pieces.
Chuck, you're one of those rare people who gets one-on-one time to talk in depth and strategically with Jensen Huang. We're going to get to listen in on a bit of that later today. What uniquely do you get from him when you call him up and you're like, all right, let's talk about this next phase? What kind of insight, what kind of reflection does he offer you?
He's funny. He always wants to know what's our next announcement. What are we announcing
Sounds
next?
like me.
Exactly. Look, he's just a brilliant guy, and so you get these moments where you get to spend time with these people who have next level thinking, which I think were most of the people on the stage today, right? When you have that opportunity, you can learn so much, and you can, and when you listen to him, Jensen or some of these others up here all day long, you can piece together where it's going. And so for me, it's always about, if I think about it from my Cisco hat on, I'm always listening to all of them just to make sure that we're, I would say triangulating, but it's more than that, to just make sure that we understand what are the implications on us, what are the implications on what we need to do for our customers, how do we help our customers actually take advantage of all the things that have been talked about. And I think what Jensen believes is that given the relationships that we have in the enterprise space and the long history we've had with our customers and hopefully the trust that we've had with our customers, we're never perfect, but we usually admit when we screw something up. What he wants to do is for us to work together to actually to help the enterprises realize the benefit of this technology. And so I think having that conversation with him and just continuing to iterate on how are we going to do that, because it hasn't moved as fast in the enterprise as many of us thought it might, and for reasons that we generally understand. So I think that's what we enjoy talking about.
I think it's amazing how directionally correct Cisco has been in so many moments over time. Like, I remember when you guys were talking about how huge video was going to be. And I mean, granted, I was a print reporter at the time, but I was like, I mean, how many video cameras are there out there? How big? I mean, I like watching video on the internet like everybody else, but how much video could there really be? Okay.
A lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of video. Now there's this talk about AI, and it's tempting as the journalistic skeptic to say, well, how big of an impact could this really have? And while there are those moments of doubt in between, I guess it's important to remember the impact in the long term can be pretty big. And that's why I'm looking forward, as I'm sure we all are, to your conversation with Jensen, because he talks a pretty big game about AI.
He sure does. It'll be a lot of fun.
All right.
So I think we're going to wrap this up and give you all a break, do a little work, but also networking. Where are we?
Yep.
Where are we going?
So we have networking right over here.
Networking's right over there.
Yep, so they get to take a break, come back at 5:30 to 7:15 is going to be networking and dinner, and then we go into Jensen's session, 7:30 to 8.
So take a break, come back 5:30 to 7:15. Break, dinner, reception, cocktails. Yes?
No, I want to say one thing after you.
And You will always enjoy my presentations better if you've had a couple of cocktails. So I would highly encouraged.
Hey, we'll do this at the end, but these events are pretty hard to orchestrate and pull together, especially when you have the caliber of people that we've had coming in. And can we do 2 bouts of recognition? I want to do 1 bout right now for the events team, and then we'll do it again at the end. But can we just give them a big round of applause for what they've done?
And I know all of you are going to come back for this Jensen thing, but please come back for this Jensen thing, because if we
He's
have
flying in from Houston for it.
If we have an empty room tonight, that's going to be really embarrassing, and this event will never exist again. So anyway, thank you all for the great day, and we'll see you in a little while.